Early in the Biden administration, there was much talk of Uncle Joe as our new FDR, coming in to save us in the wake of a disastrous presidency that plunged the country into chaos. David Gergen, who's Washington's Dean of Conventional Wisdom, wrote a piece that outlined, quote, 3 striking similarities between FDR and Biden. Time magazine explained to us that Joe Biden is positioning himself as a modern FDR. And NPR asked, can Biden join FDR and LBJ in the Democratic Party's pantheon? It's worth reading that piece because it wrote, quote, as we approach President Biden's 100th day in office at the end of this month, some observers are flattering him with comparisons to 2 legendary Democratic presidents of the 20th century, Franklin D. Roosevelt and Lyndon B. Johnson. Those names reportedly came up when historian John Meacham convened a group of his colleagues at the White House in early March for a private session with Biden. And since then, the aptness of comparing this new president to such transformative figures of the past has become a matter of some debate in Washington and beyond. The sheer scale of Biden's spending and change agenda finds its analog only in the early achievements of FDR and LBJ. But which of those administrations offers the better insight into what is happening now, or what happens next? Well, now we know what happens next, because the centerpiece of Biden's FDR-like presidency was a new massive social spending bill that was going to transform the country as it struggled to get out of the pandemic. It was going to be his version of FDR's New Deal, which helped the country crawl out of the Great Depression while transforming the American state. Biden world was calling this new initiative Build Back Better. Well, folks, as of this week, Build Back Better went Build Back Bust.
In a major blow to President Biden's agenda, Senate Democrats will likely not be able to pass his massive social spending bill before the new year. It boils down to 2 main problems. They don't have a finalized bill yet, and they also don't have the 50 votes needed to pass the nearly $2 trillion package. The Senate's most important swing vote, West Virginia Democratic Senator Joe Manchin, continues one-on-one negotiations directly with the president.
So after months of haggling, Senate Democrats have tabled the bill indefinitely. MSNBC's Jesse Rodriguez reported that Democrats were now going to focus on voting rights instead. The thing is, Build Back Better was going to pass through reconciliation, which means that Democrats only needed 50 votes. Voting rights can't go through reconciliation, which means that they would need 60 votes, or reform the filibuster. Well, just hours later, it came out that Senator Kyrsten Sinema from Arizona was a hard no on filibuster reform, and that was the end of that. As the Washington Post's Jeff Stein pointed out, the whole thing amounted to a 3-hour news cycle. So that's that. The collapse of Biden's Build Back Better should come as no surprise. There is plenty of blame to go around. A good chunk of it falls squarely on his shoulders. You see, Build Back Better was always going to be a tough sell to Democratic moderates. It simply did too much good for too many people, for craven ghouls like Manchin and Sinema to ever support it. But there was a chance early on in his administration to maybe force something through. Branko Marcetic made this point in Jacobin, quote, Build Back Better's failure can be directly traced to Biden's decision in April to drop everything and try to get Republican sign-on for something, anything, following the successful March party line vote that passed the $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill. At the time, Biden was riding high. The pandemic was trending down. The economy was rebounding as vaccines were rolled out. Biden had just signed a major and popular piece of legislation within less than 2 months, and the subdued, normal nature of his White House was a welcome respite from the wall-to-wall craziness of 4 years of Trump. All of it, as well as a full-on love affair with the political press, combined with the customary new president polling bump to give Biden an approval rating of 54% by the end of March. It's the kind of position most presidents nowadays can only dream of being in, and the leading lights of Biden's party signaled that they'd learned from their mistakes under Obama, whose fruitless months-long quest for bipartisan buy-in on his major policy items had nearly derailed his presidency. The merits of this outlook were made very real when Democrats simply cast aside unanimous GOP opposition to their pandemic relief bill, writing it with no Republican input and passing it with only Democrat votes, and proceeded to be rewarded for it in polling. No wonder, after the dysfunction of the Trump years and an even longer period of gridlock-driven government failure, Biden had proven the U.S. system of government could still work, and in the middle of a world historical crisis, no less. So Biden's desperation to pass anything that could be called bipartisan stalled his agenda for months. But it also weirdly gave progressives in Congress something they rarely ever have: leverage. When the 2 bills were split, progressives had the power to derail the bipartisan infrastructure plan that was so bad that moderate Democrats and even a lot of Republicans wanted it. They could use that to force Democratic moderates to support the way better Build Back Better plan. It was a game of chicken, and all the progressives needed to do was hold the line. Well, how do you think that turned out? Of course, the progressives blinked. It came in the wake of a disastrous electoral defeat in Virginia, where the Democrats lost the governorship to a Republican, even though Biden won the state handily just a year earlier. The moderates in the caucus and much of their mouthpieces in the media blamed the loss on the fact that progressives were stalling the president's agenda, and they voted for the bipartisan infrastructure plan, thus giving away their leverage. Here is the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, Pramila Jayapal, talking about that decision, and you will never, ever see a more stark example of breathtaking political naivete.
You compromised and you voted for the infrastructure bill without a vote on the larger spending bill at the same time. So how much faith do you put in your moderate colleagues, Congresswoman, to follow through with a vote next week for that more ambitious plan?
Well, Wolf, it's good to see you. Look, I think we had a very important negotiation with the 6 Democrats who still needed to see the CBO score. And I'm very pleased to report that I think, we started to rebuild some of the trust. They committed in writing to doing the voting for the Build Back Better Act in about 10 days. That CBO information that they're waiting for should be here by then. And they really committed that they did not believe anything was necessarily going to change with the information that they got, but they wanted to see it. And they were willing to put in writing both the date and the fact that it would be the bill as is. So no more dithering about what the provisions are. This is the bill we have, which is, of course, what progressives always wanted. So while we didn't get the actual vote, and I wish we had, Wolf, I'll just say I wish we had, but we were in a position where we felt like we got something that was almost as good, which is their commitment. And I do think that if we're going to rebuild trust, then we have to believe that when they give a commitment publicly, when they look me in the eye and each one of them says to me, yes, we're going to vote for this, that needs to be enough for us to move forward. And again, it's a date certain. In just 10 days, we'll be able to pass it through the House. Very strong vote at that point and send it over to the Senate.
You see, we have this piece of paper. They looked me in the eye. They made a promise. 10 days. We didn't get the bill. We got almost something just as good, which is just this little piece of paper. And they looked me straight in the eye and said they were going to do it. Well, I'm sorry, Congresswoman Jayapal. That is just not how politics works at all. Liberals love to talk about how norms have been eroded, yet it's a lesson that they themselves never absorb. To quote Logan Roy, life isn't knights on horseback. It's a number on a piece of paper. It's a fight for a knife in the mud. Jayapal and the progressives gave away their leverage, aka their own power, in exchange for nothing. Literally nothing. You could still hear Joe Manchin laughing his ass off as these progressive dupes fell right into his trap. To their credit, AOC and the rest of the squad opposed Jayapal's decision and voted no on infrastructure, but it shows just how divided even the progressives are on questions of basic tactics. Anyway, all of this sets up a grim politics for 2022. Progressives seem completely powerless, while conservative Democrats are happy to watch the world burn and almost seem to welcome a Republican landslide in 2022 and beyond. After the failure to pass their social spending bill, the White House is just throwing up their hands and saying, fuck it. Remember when Biden promised this?
There is talk of debt relief. There's bailing out of businesses, which is a good thing to do. What about the students? Isn't now a time to forgive student debt and then restructure how we pay for college so we're not here again in 10 years?
The answer is yes. That's why I proposed and the House, Nancy, put it in the plan to immediately provide $10,000 in debt relief as stimulus right now for students. A minimum of $10,000 relief.
Well, that's out the window. And the administration is now saying that there was a student loan moratorium, that they will have to start being repaid as of February.
Education Secretary Miguel Cardona says federal student loan borrowers can expect to restart their payments in February. Monthly payments have been paused since March of 2020 because of the pandemic. So in an election year, the Democrats will have to explain to millions of people why their bills just went up.
And they'll have to do it after explicitly promising to cancel at least some of their debt relief. Worse still, the child tax credit, which is Biden's only real policy achievement and was insanely popular, not to mention a lifesaver for new parents struggling to make ends meet, yeah, that's going away.
Today, some families across the nation are receiving their last monthly child tax credit payments. That means parents will no longer receive hundreds of dollars every month per child. That is, unless Democrats manage to pass President Biden's massive social spending pact.
Now, in case you think there's much hope in that being extended, Manchin seems like he's a no. According to CNN's Manu Raju, talks between Manchin and Biden are not going well on Build Back Better, per source familiar with the talks. A huge sticking point, the child tax credit. Manchin wants it cut. Source says he wants to zero it out. They are very, very far apart, the source says. Again, the only way to get someone to do something they don't want to do is to exercise your leverage over them. But right now, progressives and the White House have no leverage over Manchin. So it's likely that that's not going to happen. Childcare in this country is a disgrace. If anyone has had children or have loved ones who have had children, know what I'm talking about. It's virtually impossible to juggle the demands of work, bills, and the kids' needs. So Democrats will now have to explain to parents why their bills are going up too. Hey, some of them may be double whammies. New parents who also have student debt. Unsurprisingly, Biden's poll numbers are in the toilet, and they're particularly shocking when it comes to young people. According to the latest YouGov Economist poll, Biden's net approval rating among voters under 30 has gone down by 50 points. For voters between the ages of 30 to 44, it's gone down by slightly over 40 points, and this spells electoral disaster any way you slice it. So post-2022, as bleak as it sounds, our main focus will have to be to do everything we can to stop a Joe Biden administration from working with a Republican majority to implement further austerity, because he's going to be tempted to, and the political press is going to be pressuring him to all the time. And the way that happens, the only political tool that we have right now is increasing labor militancy. It's happening everywhere. Just this morning, grocery workers in Portland walked off the job. So the political avenues, they seem closed right now, and in very real ways, they are. But labor is the key to opening them. Increased labor power, organization, and militancy will change our politics in ways that are difficult to predict. The exact contours of the change are hard to see, but the overall nature of it will undoubtedly be positive. Without labor, we are doomed.
Yeah, you're on point. That was totally comprehensive. And I'm glad that you talked about both Biden's failures, but also the failures of progressives who just gave their leverage away so early on. There was a piece in Politico that we talked about on TYT yesterday, and it was meant to provide cover for Pramila Jayapal and how she's trying to spin everything that's happened as a win. And she's also planning on attempting to maintain the leadership position for the Progressive Caucus. And it blows my mind because they've failed. And now they're trying to kind of twist things, they're twisting themselves into pretzels, trying to pretend as if, no, we actually did a great job. We've provided quite a bit for our voters. But how are you going to make that argument when you haven't actually delivered the social spending package that has dominated the news cycle since the beginning of the Biden administration? People aren't stupid. And it just kind of goes back to this issue that I have, and I think a lot of people have with the Democratic Party, where I just think they consistently insult the intelligence of their base and they take their voters for granted. And they're gonna lose because they deserve to lose, but we don't deserve the Republican Party. It's a really frustrating situation. And really all they needed to do was apply pressure. And I think about it in the context of the Trump administration and what Trump was willing to do. Obviously I do not like Trump, but can you imagine if Biden had just a little bit of Trump's aggressive nature in terms of trying to accomplish whatever it is he wants to accomplish? Biden gave Manchin's wife a job, an appointment that she wanted. How about you take that away? And look, I know some people might roll their eyes at this or think it's not a good idea, but do you think that if the tables were turned, Trump wouldn't do an investigation into Mylan Pharmaceuticals or, what Manchin's daughter was up to. Like, Trump would stop at nothing to get what he wants, as we've learned. Whereas Biden's like, I don't know, here's my agenda. You guys deal with it. And I'll have these like backdoor talks with, closed door talks, I should say, with Manchin and Sinema, while also publicly saying how amazing they are and how incredible they are. No, don't constantly give them, carrots. Like, you have to fight for your agenda. And honestly, the only takeaway I have is that he didn't really mean it. Like, he didn't genuinely want to pass these proposals.
I mean, we've talked about in the past that Biden, I mean, his number one thing is belief in the Senate as a deliberative body. Like, he's got this kind of very old school mentality of the Senate, which is why he'll never like really go after Manchin or any other senator, really, even if it was like a Republican. They're just like, that's just his belief is in the Senate as an institution. He's been there for 250 years. The Jayapal thing is maybe the most breathtaking progressive cave of my life, because it was unique in that usually the progressives are put into an impossible situation. And I can always see the argument for caving, which is like they have to choose between holding the line, and destroying a piece of legislation, or basically ruining the lives of, like, it's usually tied to like, cuts in food stamps or, taking away some big housing subsidy. Like, there's always real harm attached to it, to the choice. They have to either hold the line and destroy the whole bill, this awful bill that they don't want to pass, or they have to let, some important federal program just like expire. That's usually the bind that they're in. And there's an argument to be made that they should hold the line, but there's a understanding or empathy coming from me where it's like, when faced with the, having to stare some mother in the face and be like, I'm sorry, your food stamps were cut. I could have voted for it, and you're going to starve now. Like, I can see that stark choice being brutal. This one was not that. This is not that at all.
Exactly.
This is just a straight up, like, they could hold the line this time and not suffer the consequences. The only consequence, like, in terms of like harm for actual people, this bipartisan infrastructure plan, it doesn't have anything like that. It doesn't, it's not a choice between that or cutting food stamps, which is usually what it is. This is just like, we don't have to vote for this thing. We don't want this. This thing's awful. There's nothing, there's no gun to my head on this one. All there is social pressure from the press and from the White House and from Nancy Pelosi and from whomever to do it, and just hold the line. Like that, to me, it's unforgivable. Like, it's like political malpractice on a level that I can't remember. I've heard the arguments, and I've had the arguments, and I flip flop on them all the time about the choices that progressives have had in the past on certain things. There was talk, for example, of blocking the ACA when Obamacare was passed. Like, that was a stark choice. Like, the ACA, like, it'll improve the lives of a lot of people. It was a terrible bill, but there was a real kind of human benefit calculus to be done there. Like,
totally, it was a mixed bag. It was definitely a mixed bag, and there were provisions in the Affordable Care Act that ended up improving our broken healthcare system. So I agree with you on that. But you're right about the bipartisan infrastructure bill. I mean, it has insanely awful provisions in there. Like the one that I talk about the most, because it's going to have a negative impact on workers, privatizing public infrastructure.
Yeah.
That's why corporations and Republicans liked it. That's why they were pushing for it. That's why you got Republicans voting for it. When you have Republicans in the Senate and the House voting for it, you know that there's some corporate handout there that their donors absolutely want. And why do I say that it's actually going to, further hurt the lives of workers? Because think about it. You have corporations taking over roads and bridges that once were public. What do you think they're going to do? They're going to implement tolls. They're going to implement fees and fines and all sorts of, regressive taxes that end up hurting people as they're trying to commute to and from work. And we've seen how that's been a failure in other contexts with various states who have already tried that model. And it's devastating. So you're right. Pramila Jayapal, and she's not the only one. I mean, Ro Khanna is another progressive lawmaker who I agree with on a lot of different things, but he was also insanely naive in regard to the promise that the moderate Democrats were making. Well, if
what are
moderate
these people
Democrats-
thinking? Like,
Yeah.
what are these people like? What is it? Like, what have they been asleep? Like, what? Seriously, like, it's literally inexcusable. Like, I don't like, I'm not like a fire, like a bomb thrower in this kind of thing, with this kind of thing. But this one is literally inexcusable.
Right.
There is no way you can inhabit that mind space or like be awake in the last decade, for example, or even in the last few years, and think that, like, actually believe that this was gonna, like, I don't know. It's just, it drives me crazy.
And there's a lot at stake. I mean, to go back to what you briefly mentioned about the Senate shelving the Build Back Better agenda to aggressively focus on voting rights. As you correctly mentioned, Kyrsten Sinema is against reforming the legislative filibuster, right? So it was a lie from the beginning. Like, they knew from the beginning that they don't have all Democrats on board in terms of, at a minimum, reforming the legislative filibuster, maybe even creating a carve out for voting rights. And I bring that up because it just, again, goes back to how little they really care about representing the best interests of their own constituents. And they don't even really care. At first, I was like, well, I mean, voting rights, their political careers are at stake here because you have voter suppression in various states right now, and you need that voting rights bill to pass in order to mitigate the damage that's being done in all these various states with the suppression laws. And I realized, like, no, they don't even care about democracy. I mean, if they see that elections are now rigged and they can't get reelected thanks to gerrymandering and all of that, well, they'll just work as consultants or lobbyists and they'll make a ton of money. They don't care. I mean, the only thing that's at stake here really is our democratic process, as flawed as it is, and basically the future of ordinary Americans. Who cares about that? They'll get paid.
Yeah. It's tough. It's a tough one. Again, we talk about, like, there was a brief opening in the electoral arena around the twin Bernie Sanders campaigns. The Democratic Party was vulnerable. It was on its knees, but they fought back, and now the avenues seem very closed on that front. And there just needs to be a different calculus on how to shift the balance of power. And it's going to be a long slog. It's going to be brutal. We're entering a very strange political time in which there is a genuine move from working class people to the Republican Party. We're going to see a situation in which the workers are split amongst the two parties, where, the two parties basically have in their camp workers and, rich capitalists, and divided along culture lines. And that is a recipe for an awful, awful politics. Like, that is just the worst thing you can possibly have. I don't think the Republican Party is going to win with workers, but they're going to peel off enough in which there's going to be a divide. And it's going to be along culture lines, and it's just going to make everyone insane. Everyone yell at each other. Everyone hate each other while literally nothing happens. And the rich get richer and everything else just gets slightly worse every year.
Yeah, that's been an ongoing trend. And, I think there's an obvious reason why you see both parties just constantly engaged in culture wars. Because what else are they going to do? Talk about their differences on economic policy? I mean, Democrats might be able to claim that they favor different economic policy, but considering the fact that they never fight for it, it makes one question whether they're being honest, right?
If you enjoyed this video from Jacobin Weekends, please hit like and subscribe. That way, you'll enjoy all of our backlog, as well as all of our future content, including interviews, live streams, and clips. Thank you.